I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers, Roger Lanto, Director of Automotive Connected Mobility at Strategy Analytics, and Mark Thomas, Vice President of Alliances and Marketing for Ridecell.
Okay.
Roger, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex. Hi, this is Roger Lanto with Strategy Analytics, here to share a substantial amount of information to you from what I'd like to say is two industry experts, myself and Mark Thomas. Mark Thomas from Ridecell being in the arena, if you will. As Alex says, without further ado, let me get into some slides because I probably have too many here. So forgive me if I skip over them a little bit quickly. You will have the material following the call. The impetus behind the call is we've just launched the service a little earlier this year, looking at automotive connected mobility. So we'll be looking at the business models in this service, advising our clients regarding service providers, what mobility as a service means, the regulatory framework, and OEM strategies, OEMs being the car companies, of course. There are three perspectives inherent in the program. So we're including both secondary research, for which I'm primarily responsible for, and primary research, where we're evaluating systems in the field, as well as looking at user experiences, customer clinics, and surveying consumers about their experiences and their preferences around mobility services. This is some of the reports that we'll be publishing that we have already published. Many of these are already published this year, and what the roster of reports looks like next year. What we're looking at right now is a phenomenon that is actually not new. It's more than 10 years old, and that is car sharing. And increasingly in the service, we'll also be looking at other forms of new use cases for cars, but car sharing is a key focal point. And one of the core questions around car sharing is the idea of the impact on car ownership. And in essence, there has not been a huge impact on car ownership. But in general, what we're talking about is transportation as a service. We're talking about a phenomenon that is beginning to get traction, though it is not new. It's been around a while, but it's getting more attention. And there's a variety of reasons for that, including consumers looking for new ways to interact with cars, and car companies and other market entrants looking at a new opportunity to interact with consumers that have transportation needs. Cities are looking at this opportunity as a way to strategically, and OEMs as well, increase vehicle utilization, reduce vehicle ownership, remove older, less fuel-efficient vehicles, increase usage penetration of newer, safer, more fuel-efficient vehicles, increase exposure of cars to non-owners, so that's really more of an OEM priority, and introduce the idea of shared transportation resources. In essence, cities are struggling with a oversupply of vehicles on the road and all the impacts that go with that. Car companies are looking at their cars sitting in driveways not being used and sitting in parking lots. So we're looking to up the utilization of cars, and perhaps cities are looking to reduce the ownership of vehicles. So there are some interesting results, and there's quite a bit of research that has already been done in this area, and that is some of what I'm going to talk about briefly before Mark's comments. So there is not a massive amount of cars currently available, and we don't expect a massive amount of cars to be made available by virtue of car sharing services. We do expect a relatively steady increase, and especially as use cases multiply, as opposed to just free floating on the street. There will be campus-based and other sort of amenity opportunities, but it is attracting more and more participants, subscribers, and users of these programs. The expectation is that car sharing will reduce car ownership. And if we went with the assumptions of some of the leading researchers in the space and go with their low estimate of each shared vehicle taking away 7 vehicle sales, you'd see a pretty substantial negative impact on overall global vehicle volume. However, we really don't expect that scenario to emerge at Strategy Analytics. What we expect to happen really is more of a balancing, a load balancing, taking into account new use cases, dealers using shared vehicles as loaner cars, vehicles as amenities, community cars, concierge opportunities, et cetera. And so it's likely that there may be a net negative impact, but in the aggregate, there is an opportunity to expand the usage of cars and get cars to people who basically don't have cars. Because if you look and ride-sharing services, a lot of the participants, majority of them are non-vehicle owners. However, there is this overarching view that it's going to unmitigatedly negatively impact sales. So, study from Martin, Shaheen, and Liddiker estimates that to date, car-sharing services have removed 90 to 130,000 vehicles from the road. They're estimating 9 to 13 vehicles per car-sharing vehicle, including vehicles that were shed as well as postponed vehicle purchases. The latest report from CarPlus London found car-sharing members had disposed of 26,000 cars. But what we're seeing is new use cases. They're being used in ride-hailing services, and some of the use cases I already mentioned. The dealer use of cars is just beginning to emerge. The key aspect, and that we have some strategy analytics research on this, is the inclination of frequent users of car-sharing services, their inclination to consider buying a car where they didn't have a car before. But there is a demand issue. It is not enough to simply put the cars on the road in the manner of car-to-go, for example, or in parking garages like Zipcar. If you look at what BMW is doing and what Maven is doing, they're driving demand. So BMW is putting drivers in shared vehicles to turn them into ride-hailing opportunities, and Maven, of course, is making vehicles available to Lyft drivers. It's expanding the transportation portfolio and increasing the usage of cars and getting cars into use cases where they were not available before. Again, with regard to the participants in car-sharing programs, they're predominantly non-owners of cars. This is, again, according to the Martin, Shaheen, and Liddiker research. And the CarPlus survey also found a predominance of non-car owners using car-sharing. And after they started participating in car-sharing, they shed more cars, resulting in even more people not having cars. So there is this theme. But I think it's still early days. And in fact, even if you look in the CarPlus survey data, they show that over time, the disinclination of car-sharing members to be interested in purchasing a car is actually declining over time. So there is some interest, and it may reflect that the early car-sharing participants were really militantly against owning a car, or simply it was economically not feasible. But as the service expands, it's bringing in more people from a more diverse relationship with the automobile. I compare it a little bit to usage-based insurance, where there was initial enthusiasm among drivers who thought they would qualify and it would be a positive and they would get a discount on their insurance. But over time, there's been some dwindling in enthusiasm for usage-based insurance. Car sharing in the same way as completely abandoning cars is no longer the guiding principle. This is the strategy analytics research. This is just one chart from a larger report that goes into much greater detail. But what you're seeing is the more frequent the user of the service, whether it's the US, Europe, or China, the more likely that user is to be inclined to purchase a vehicle. With regard to the impact, there's some secondary impacts that are sort of non-obvious, and that is that the cars that tend to be shed by participants in car-sharing programs tend to be older cars that are less fuel efficient and higher polluting, so that over time you get a much cleaner fleet if you're in a region where car sharing is widely adopted and implemented and penetrated into the marketplace. So cities are embracing car sharing for these reasons, because it's solving multiple problems, getting cars off the road and reducing congestion, reducing emissions. So these studies, so CarPlus found that 80% of car club cars are in the lowest 3 emission bands. The latest diesel car club cars are expected to leave the fleet entirely by the end of 2017. 3 and 4 car bookings start during off-peak or weekend periods, and they're reducing their miles driven through these programs. A little bit of a wild card here, as I look at this opportunity, is the role of dealers. Dealers, I don't think, have completely come to grips with the opportunity. I think GM dealers are just beginning to look at this. I think in Europe, Volkswagen is starting to look at how to leverage car sharing to change up the relationship with the consumer. So there's a role for dealers that's only just beginning to unfold. And of course, dealers have a role to play in the care and maintenance and preparation of those vehicles. Again, there are challenges around car sharing. Growth has been slow and uneven. Market entries have been followed by market exits. No 2 cities are alike. Each city has a unique requirement for an opportunity for car sharing implementation. So issues include the failure to understand the local market demand or vehicle usage behaviors. Some markets are already oversupplied, even at this early state. You had enterprise having some difficulties in Chicago where vehicles were being vandalized and damaged. And there's a lack of marketing support, although the marketing support is coming from the idea of creating demand, as in the case of Maven and as in the case of BMW. So it's not enough just to advertise the vehicles, but so Maven has pursued opportunities to target applications in the gig economy, making vehicles available for delivery services and other specific use cases. Again, it's not enough just to put the cars out there. It requires a more determined marketing program. Governments are obviously looking to this opportunity for all the reasons previously described. OEMs are looking at a new way of interacting with consumers, increasing vehicle utilization, and getting non-drivers and non-vehicle owners into a vehicle. And there's a bigger opportunity, which Mark will talk about, which is a massive revenue upside from dealing with transportation as a service rather than simply transportation as a piece of hardware. So in the long term, the thought I'd like to leave you with is that ultimately the automotive industry is evolving into a fleet-oriented industry. And that would be an industry where all vehicles are connected, they're all networked, they're all shared or shareable. In other words, the systems are in the car are ready to go for sharing or, for that matter, ride-hailing purposes, and potentially autonomous or perhaps semi-autonomous. And finally, accessible on demand. So those are my thoughts, and I'd like to now turn the ball over to Mark for his input on this new transportation economy.
Hey, thanks, Roger. Hey, I would just add to your list there at the end. I would say that the last bullet should also then include electric. E-vehicles are going to become a key component of the future autonomous. So my name is Mark Thomas. I am the VP of Alliances and Marketing here at Ridecell. At Ridecell, we make a platform for new mobility. We provide car sharing and ride sharing and now autonomous services as a white label platform for companies. Just to give a sense of, why there's been so much attention to this space, mobility services are really the growth engine in the automotive industry. If you look at this slide, in the gray boxes are the gray bars anyhow, are the market caps of the automotive companies, the traditional OEMs, with their business of selling vehicles to individuals. The other boxes, these green boxes, are the projected market cap of mobility as a service providers. And you can really see that as the years go by, the value of the mobility service providers becomes much greater than the value of the traditional automotive OEM, which is, I think one of the reasons why so many companies are now focused on how do we participate in this new mobility revolution. One of the things that when you look at projected vehicle sales and people think, there's going to be the demise of vehicle sales because we're going to start using cars much more efficiently. There won't be as many cars sold. And really, the overall numbers of predicted future car sales don't drop very dramatically over at least the next 20 years. And when you look at it, what's more interesting is looking not at the overall number, but who's buying the vehicles. And somewhere between 2025 and 2030, for North America in urban areas, there will be more cars sold to on-demand services than cars sold to individuals buying them for their private use. So the customer will dramatically change. When you look at where we are today, these new mobility, in San Francisco, it seems like, every other car on the road is an Uber or a Lyft, and so we get a rather warped perspective of the penetration of mobility as a service. especially for ride sharing. It's the total number of rides that are done through car sharing or ride sharing, total number of miles driven versus the number of people miles driven privately is around 1%. And it's when you look forward out to 2030 that you see that mobility as a service will account for about a third of all vehicle miles by 2030. And that, in a large part is driven by the growth of autonomous mobility as a service. And so that, we can see the green area will account for roughly a quarter of all the miles will be autonomous. And then there's, looks like roughly 10% will remain as driven mobility as a service. So either, in the car sharing model or ride sharing where somebody comes and picks you up. What does this mean? This means that the revenues from these services will continue to grow dramatically. In fact, by 2030, it becomes roughly a $1.5 trillion market, which is what's driving that $9 trillion valuation of companies by 2030 that provide these offerings. You can take a look and see the green being the U.S., blue being EU, and the orange color is China. You can really see that the growth in China will really start to take off. In fact, the number of miles that are traveled as mobility as a service miles in China in 2030 will be probably about half. So a market that's ripe to really grow. Now, when we see the industries that are stepping up and coming to us to talk about new mobility, it's those industries that stand to lose when private vehicle ownership declines. So the automotive industry has been the one, specifically automotive OEMs, have been quite visible in terms of how are they reinventing themselves. General Motors with Maven, or BMW's Drive Now and now Reach Now in North America, a service that we power. The dealers themselves are also coming to us saying, hey, how do we participate in this new mobility? We're concerned that in today's world, we are the face of the OEM brand to our customers. In tomorrow's world, when they're out creating consumer brands, signing up customers, their worry is, are they going to be disintermediated? And other than Volkswagen, who we are powering a car sharing service in Poland for them, which uses their dealer network to service the vehicles, provide the cars, and actually run the entire operation. For the most part, these OEMs are going around the dealer community. Other organizations that are serving private vehicle ownerships, like auto clubs, also realize that, hey, no one's going to join an auto club if they consume their transportation as a service and don't own a vehicle anymore. Even now, the AAA in California has a very aging membership base, and so they launched a one-way car-sharing service in Berkeley and Oakland called Gig, and without any experience in operating vehicle mobility services, and have been quite successful. It's, again, something that's powered by the Ridecell platform. Auto insurance companies are understanding with autonomous, there'll be far fewer accidents, and if more miles driven are going to be through these mobility services, that means our customers will be far fewer, and those that we do insure will have more power. So they're understanding how do they participate. And then finally, related industries, rental car companies are, the original, I will let you use a car for a day. And even they see that if a rideshare can pick somebody up at the curb, but for somebody to take a rental car, they have to get in a shuttle, drive off-site, wait in lines, go, grab some keys, go find a car, check out. That model is feeling pretty heavyweight and antiquated in this new on-demand revolution. So the rental agencies are also realizing they have to reinvent themselves in an on-demand world where one-way trips and micro rentals for 10 minutes are part of their offering. And then energy companies see this as an opportunity to vertically integrate. Companies that realize, hey, the more charging stations there are, the more cars that use charging stations, maybe this is their opportunity to buy and provide transportation as a service instead of just electricity as a service. So it's an interesting time to see lots of industries stepping up into the new mobility world. So how do when we talk about capitalizing on this and we look at mobility as a service, it's evolved from private vehicle ownership, which has been around for 100 years, to car sharing, which we've had for maybe 10 years or so, and ride sharing, which has been prevalent maybe for about 5 years. Now, when we are talking to companies that want to participate in this mobility and service revolution, I think the feeling is all roads need to go through ride sharing. They have to compete with an Uber or a Lyft to successfully make it into the next round of this autonomous mobility as a service, which is the $9 billion opportunity. But we actually see that the things along the bottom axis are all driven vehicles, and that self-driving vehicles changes things dramatically. What comes next is not what's on the right of the ride-sharing arrow, but what's above everything. Autonomous mobility as a service actually has a lot more in common with car sharing today than it does with ride sharing. In car sharing, for instance, the proprietor or the service owner has to own and service their fleet of vehicles, and that's a difficult thing to be able to figure out how to do. You're responsible for, thousands of vehicles, keeping each one of them clean. What if there's a check engine light that comes on or the battery level's low? Who's servicing them? In ride sharing, the primary skill that the ride sharing operator has today is recruiting and managing drivers. So there's a dramatic benefit in entering the market for preparing for autonomous mobility as a service by starting in the car sharing space as opposed to the ride sharing space, which is pretty crowded. From a customer-based perspective, certainly the use case of open an app, press a button, somebody comes, picks me up and takes me to the final destination, ride sharing is closer to the usage model than car sharing is today, where you still have to walk and get your vehicle. There's kinds of car sharings where you can request that your vehicle be valet delivered to you, so you can enhance car sharing in a way that makes it closer to the ride sharing experience. In the end, we think that autonomous mobility as a service will follow in the footsteps of some of these other mature markets for transportation as a service. And in particular, if you think about the airline model, there isn't one airline brand that covers the world and is a monopoly. When we look and see what Uber's been trying to do to own this marketplace, some people are feeling like, hey, it's going to be Uber and somebody else that'll be the final player. But we're already seeing regionally lots of different players popping up and getting, more than $1 billion of committed investment. And in fact, the future model is not to have every single company provide enough vehicles to meet 100% of the demand, but to have an alliance model that says, I will own you as a customer, but if I have a partner who has a more convenient vehicle to you, I will refer you to them so that you get the best possible service, not just are limited to our own particular brand. So that's a bit about our perspective. We are Ridecell. We were founded in 2009 with the mission of providing new mobility services. We are the only new mobility platform that powers car sharing, ride sharing, and now autonomous mobility. Some of the customers that we talked about are BMW, Volkswagen, Skoda, AAA, and others. So we provide the intelligent platform for new mobility services.
Cyber doggy. Okay. I like it, Mark. Thank you. Alex, do we have some questions?
Yes, Roger, we do, and thanks again, Roger and Mark. For the first question that we're going to get started with here, there is a wave of insourcing in the industry recently. How will insourcing impact the management of shared and networked vehicles?
I think Mark has a unique perspective here, but from what I'm seeing is most car companies approaching this are realizing very quickly that they need help, that there's too many moving parts here, logistics, vehicle management, cleaning, prepping, fueling, recharging, as well as the commerce aspects and partnership seems to be the approach. But long term, I'm not sure. I think if you look at what's going on in telematics, it could transfer over. In other words, car companies may come to realize that managing a fleet in the future, in the kind of time frame of 2030, that fleet management will be required as a core competency. But today, it is not. There's only a few car companies that are even close to having that core competency, and even those companies who I'm thinking of have turned to third parties.
Yeah, Roger, just to echo that, it requires much more than an app to make this work. People think of it as, the consumer downloads an app and the car, is magically there and ready. The management platform itself is a very difficult thing to do. And so when you look at this, companies that are used to making vehicles where consumer services, even for that, the head unit, are difficult things. Imagine trying to create an entire mobility as a service, streamlined SaaS experience that is a direct-to-consumer. That's just not in the OEM's wheelhouse. In fact, the IT departments at OEMs are typically not the most popular organizations, as their IT systems have been around for a long time, and even just trying to stitch them together to have one view of a customer, as opposed to the vehicle-centric view which their systems have today. So it's you need a platform, and then there's an ecosystem that's developing around mobility, so that you need an insurance program that's integrated and understands how what the driver pool is like, so that you understand how to properly assess the risk and give the lowest possible insurance to them. You need fleet management. You need telematics, because in many instances, the vehicles that are being put into these services are low-end vehicles that come out of the factory stripped down. So having a third party that understands how to put telematics, NFC, Bluetooth, so that people can get into the vehicle even if it doesn't have a 3G or 4G connection that's live at any given moment. So there's a lot of pieces to put this whole experience together, and that's one of the things that Ridecell provides is the underlying platform, and then relationships with each of these ecosystem providers, so that really the focus for an OEM or anybody who wants to get in the business is to do the sales and marketing and find their value proposition and recruit their customers.
All right. Thanks, Mark and Roger. For the next question, you guys mentioned touched on this a little bit, but what will the role of dealers going forward be? How is it evolving in support of or as participants in ride sharing or new ownership use models?
So the core challenge of the automotive industry is that it's a B2B industry. The car makers sell the cars to the dealers interact with the consumer. So the dealers understand the logistics, the dealers understand the wear and tear on the car and the value of the car. They know how to educate the consumer, and they're better positioned to explore these new use cases, especially in the context of potentially identifying new sales prospects for selling new cars. And especially attractive for dealers is the fact that there's such a large population within the car sharing user community of people who don't have cars. So it's an incredible opportunity to better understand those customers and better serve their needs, either with alternative means of transportation going forward, or at least interesting them in a more, a traditional way of getting around in an automobile or some other vehicle.
The dealers are in an interesting spot. As we move to a world where transportation becomes on demand, the dealers are starting to wonder, are they the next Blockbuster Video or corner video store? Are they the people who are selling an asset to private individuals when private individuals are in the midst of deciding that they don't need to own that asset anymore. They can just get it on demand and not have to worry about maintaining it, storing it, et cetera. So then the other piece of the precarious puzzle is the dealers are traditionally looking to the OEMs as that is the source of their innovation. The dealers are smaller, don't have as much money or power potentially as an OEM. So they are like, tell us what to do. And when they see that the OEMs are establishing their services and are potentially going to disintermediate them from their customer relationship, that's, doubly problematic. So the dealers that we're talking to now have typically it's their, CEO or the head of strategy are realizing, hey, we have to embrace new mobility. And the new mobility, it's maybe we can embrace it to help sell more cars or help our service offering by, using it for loaner vehicles or even test drives. But the reality is they have to reinvent themselves, and they're in a great place to do that because they have the entire service infrastructure. They know how to wash cars. They have real estate. They have vehicle inventories. So, if AAA can do this without, having much of any experience in purchasing vehicles, maintaining them, cleaning them, the dealer should be in an even better position to do this. And so we are excited to be talking to some of the leading dealers across the world to help them architect their way. And the thing about the dealership is they don't believe that they have an IT department that can make this happen on their own. They actually realize they have to partner for all of these functions in order to make it happen.
Thank you, Mark. Our next question is in relation to defining leadership in the ride-sharing and car-sharing space, and what factors go into defining that leadership. Revenue, profit, brand awareness. What are your thoughts on that?
So it's early days, even though car sharing's been around for 10 years. It's just sort of beginning to get real traction. I think there are some profit leaders like Communito and a couple of others that have been profitable sort of from day one. And this is in the context of growth that has not been kind of hockey stick like, although it is beginning to ramp more recently. Name recognition, clearly would go to someone like a Car2Go or a Zipcar. The presence of Car2Go on every street corner certainly makes a strong statement. But of course, maybe you don't want a Smart for two. Maybe you want a bigger vehicle. So I think the leadership proposition is challenging to it's challenging to put a crown on anybody's head right now, because just the awareness of car sharing, I think, is still in the early stages, and because most of the services are not universally available in all cities, you don't see a lot of national advertising campaigns. But I think as the deployment increases and more services are available in more cities, we'll have more clear-cut market leadership. But in the meantime, I'd actually be inclined to give leadership kudos to the most creative players out there, and so I think BMW has been especially clever in working with Ridecell to come up with an increasing range of use cases and exploring all kinds of different ways to get cars to vehicle for all kinds of ad hoc circumstances. And as I said earlier, Maven looking for ways to drive usage of the vehicles with the gig kind of economy use cases, and leasing vehicles to Lyft drivers and things of that type. Recognizing that you just, as I've said, you can't just stick the car on the road in most cases.
Right. A couple thoughts also. I think leadership kind of comes in two flavors. Right now, leadership is, are they even in the market, in the business, are they trying a service out so that they can start to build their learning? And we have talked to many different OEMs who their strategy departments are trying to design the perfect offering, in a vacuum. And it's those companies that get out and say, you know what, we're going to learn by doing. We're going to start to build a brand that is a sharing-oriented brand. So I think the first piece is, are they in the market today? And the second piece is, are they in the market with an experience where they can actually try multiple different kinds of offerings to learn from? With, BMW has been a provider of car sharing services in Europe for years with this Drive Now offering, which they did in partnership with a rental car company called Sixt. And when they expanded to North America, they created, for one, they realized that, hey, in the future, people aren't going to be driving the cars. They're going to be using them to reach their destinations. They're going to be passengers. So they renamed the service, understanding that this is going to become a much more future-oriented thing. And the second is that they chose Ridecell as their platform provider, in part because they have an understanding that traditional car-sharing services, which have been around a long time, have not been wildly profitable. I mean, they're very strategic, yes, but there's also a mandate to make money with these things. And so the ability to take this expensive fleet of BMW vehicles, which they, are procuring new from the factory, and put them to use for more than one activity, so that during the day when car sharing is at the highest demand, people like to use it to run errands, the parking is easier. Then in the evenings, when the vehicles have less demand, they hire chauffeurs and put, these drivers in the cars that are employed by them. And they reach out to their same customer base with the same app to allow people to request not just reserve a car, but request a ride. And in fact, in Seattle, where this service is live, running 2 services with one fleet of vehicles, they're finding that people like getting picked up in a BMW 3 Series car with a very, a uniformed chauffeur with the white gloves who gets out and opens the door for you. And, the idea that, hey, I could pay for an Uber Black, but those, the likelihood somebody's going to show up in a Cadillac Escalade, a huge gas guzzler, in a city where people are quite conscious about the environment, that's actually a negative. So there's a category of people who like high service without having, vehicles which are ostentatious or gas guzzlers, which is kind of starting to show the point that ride hailing will have many different niches that each appeal to a particular customer segment. So that's how we evaluate it. Both, are you in the market, and are you in the market with a platform that lets you try station-based car sharing and free-floating car sharing, and you run your own ride-sharing service, and put some cars in a residential high-rise complex and make them available just to the people that live there. These are the kinds of experimentation that needs to happen now to really understand what you're going to be when this autonomous future shows up.
Okay, moving on to one of the next questions. In relation to car sharing being an evolution or not an evolution of the rental car industry, and ride sharing of the taxi industry, is that the way that you guys see it going, as an evolution of those industries, or as something completely separate that coincide?
Well, I think what Mark sort of described in his comments from the presentation was a merging of multiple use cases and scenarios, and having a platform that enables multiple use cases and scenarios. So one of the big complaints that we found in our consumer studies is that a lot of people abandon car sharing because ride hailing is so much easier because the car comes to you. Well, Mark's just described a scenario where, why don't we put a driver in the shared car during certain business hours that makes sense, and will drive the car to the person. And maybe you drive them around like a ride hailing, or maybe you're just dropping the car off with them, delivering the car to them. So then you're blurring the line between these two. I think the rental car industry sees an absolute threat from car sharing because the use case is so similar. But the success pattern has been a little bit mixed, and there are some earnings reports coming up that should clarify things again. But the last round of earnings reports suggested some hiccups and some struggles there, and that may have to do with being more flexible, and not so rigid in how you're looking at the opportunity. Ride hailing, of course, is having a direct impact on both taxis and rental car companies. I've had instances, and I know many people who come in town and they make that decision. Am I going to Hertz or Avis, or am I going to Uber or Lyft? So I think it's much more of a blended proposition, and impacts are being felt by all parties involved. And I think survival requires flexibility and creativity in the offer.
Yeah, it's the whole mobility space is converging because, your choice at an airport is, do I go to the rental car company? It's probably not likely that you're going to go find a car sharing station and rent it there. So the competition in the airports are the ride hailing guys that just come pick you up, take you to your hotel. You don't have to worry about the hotel valet or the $50 a day parking charges. But the evolution from a car rental company that makes, that generally has pretty high utilization rates. The cars are rented 90% of the time. And if you look at Hertz public statements, you can see that they, on average, can get, $20, $25 a day for a vehicle. Station-based car sharing has a lower overall utilization rate than free-floating car sharing. And so you can make, let's say, $24,000 a year with a vehicle that's in a station-based model. And in part, station-based means the car has to get picked up and returned at the exact same location, which is, less convenient than being able to get in the car, drive it to your destination, do a few errands, and then just leave it when you're done. So free-floating car sharing are these cars that you typically rent by the minute or by the mile, and you can make upwards, more than $100 a day, getting, somewhere between 15 and 20% utilizations out of it. And if you look at, Hertz has got the same fleet of vehicles. They're getting $20 a day. And in one-way car sharing, these cars are getting more than $100 a day. It's the same asset. So, understanding and realizing that if you can make it available to more people, maybe 5 or 6 people will use that car during any single day, as opposed to a Hertz vehicle where just one person uses it, and it probably spends a lot of its time parked in hotels or conference venues. Being able to take these vehicles and release them allows a lot more efficiency for the vehicle utilization rates, which means the more people are using it, the more money you're able to make from that car. So, which is why, there's a much bigger upside in offering vehicles, one way, free floating style. And I think the auto rental companies in particular are realizing, hey, we have to have a different model that allows our cars to just float around the city and even park in metered spots, and as opposed to having people get in shuttle buses and come to where our cars are.